Ultimately, Russ confided to Jolynn that he was concerned for his own safety, telling her that if anything happened to him, that she should look into it. Russ was determined to just make it work with Barbara. In 1984, he and Barbara rededicated themselves to their marriage and to God and became even more active in their church. They would stay together. By 1985, the couple felt that they could move to a larger home, and despite the warnings of Russ's parents, they sold the house on Bivens Road and bought a larger house. It was close by, a modern 3-bedroom home in a quiet development on a wooded lot. In 1986, things were looking up for Barbara and Russ. They were in a brand new home. Barbara had been given a better position at Duke Medical Center, where she now worked with her mother, and she even began taking college classes to complete the degree that she had been forced to drop out of when she had become pregnant with her first son, Brian. Russ was now working at his high school alma mater as a driver's ed teacher, as well as coach of the baseball team and assistant coach of the football team. In 1987, Russ completed his master's degree in physical education, and Barbara was excelling in her college classes and also doing well professionally in her duties at Duke Medical Center. Things were great, but only from the outside. In reality, nothing would stop both Russ and Barbara from overspending. They bought new cars, new watches, new appliances, and they even bought a new boat. They had started to slide into deep debt once again. Russ again touched base with Jolynn, although they hadn't seen each other in about 3 years. They talked about their families, and Russ would talk about Brian and Jason and all of their accomplishments. However, Russ looked very tired to Jolynn. And before they parted, Russ mentioned again that if anything happened to him, Jolynn should look into it. "I know I'm being paranoid," he had laughed. Russ's work in the National Guard expanded his knowledge of guns, with Russ joining the unit's pistol team. The requirement of the team was to be trained in special firearms safety classes. He also taught the boys how to shoot, and he taught Barbara to handle the .25 semi-automatic gun that he had purchased a couple years ago. Russ's work in the Guard also gave him additional life insurance benefits. So that benefit, in addition to the other policies he had, totaled around $160,000. On the weekend of January 30th, 1988, Barbara and Russ spent time with both of their families, going with Barbara's parents to look at a farm that they had planned on purchasing, and on Sunday watching the Super Bowl football game with Russ's parents. Russ went to bed early on that Sunday night, anxious and looking forward to Monday. It was to be the first day of preseason baseball practice, and it was to be his last night in his own bed. Early Monday morning at 6 a.m. on February 1st, 1988, a call came in to 911 dispatch. The caller was 13-year-old Jason Stager, the younger son of Barbara and Russ. His scared voice asked the operator to send an ambulance, saying that his father had a gun and it had just went off. EMTs arrived at the scene not knowing what to expect at 2833 Fox Drive. The house was located in a prosperous neighborhood in the northern suburbs of Durham, North Carolina. Built in 1984, the modern home had 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, and sat on an acre of wooded property. Set back from the road, the house had a very long driveway. The first responders were directed by Jason to the main bedroom, where Barbara was waiting, with the door ajar and the room dark. When they came to the door, she turned on the light and let them in. She was wearing a nightshirt. The man on the bed was alive, but barely. He was not moving and his breathing was very raspy. He was unconscious. His pulse was racing, and blood was coming from his mouth and nostrils. First responders determined that the injury was a gunshot to the head, and the initial thought was that it was an accidental shooting. The gun was lying between two pillows. It was a small black .25 caliber semi-automatic Beretta, and a spent shell lay just a few inches away. Hovering at the end of the bed, Barbara began crying, moaning, "Why does he keep those things in here?" Barbara told the responders that she had been pulling a gun out from underneath her husband's pillow when it had just discharged. She said that her husband had put it under his pillow because he had been hearing sounds outside and he thought that there may have been a burglar in the area. Barbara stated that she had heard her son leave his bedroom and go to the bathroom for his shower, and that she was concerned that her husband might mistake him for an intruder, deciding to remove the gun from under his pillow. Then it had just went off, she said. More medical personnel arrived on the scene to work on Russ. His cranium was filling with blood, and the responders knew that if he was not stabilized, the pressure on his brain would kill him. More than one of the responders recognized Russ as an acquaintance or a friend. As they worked, Barbara kept talking about how Russ kept too many guns. "My God, I'm scared of these guns. I wish he wouldn't keep them here. Guns aren't safe. There are kids in the house." To the police who had arrived on the scene, she said that Russ was obsessed with guns, carrying them in the car and leaving them under his pillow. Barbara had also changed by this point from her nightshirt into jeans and a sweatshirt. She requested that Russ be taken to Duke University Medical Center. The officer drove Barbara to the hospital, and she had declined his offer to call Russ's parents. At the hospital, the doctors delivered the sad news that the bullet had gone through Russ's brain and lodged into the front of his skull. Russ Stager was brain dead. Accompanied by her minister, Barbara decided to go home to shower and change before returning to Russ, now on life support. She likely also cleaned up the bedroom while she was home. Barbara went back to the hospital to stand vigil at Russ's bedside. Her older son Brian had arrived from college. Brian, age 19, was a student at the University of North Carolina in Wilmington. Together they decided that Russ would not choose to live on life support, and they asked for him to be taken off the support. Russ would die at 12:30 p.m. on February 1st, 1988, only 6 hours after the 911 call had been made. Russ Stager was 40 years old. He was a popular baseball coach at Durham High School and a driver's ed instructor. He was a National Guardsman, and he served his country in the Army Reserves. He was loved and admired by his family and friends, and he was just a trusting guy. Too trusting. Sergeant Rick Buchanan, lead homicide investigator of Durham County Sheriff Department, was tasked with the job of looking into the death of Russ Stager. Buchanan went to Barbara's parents' house to talk to Barbara on Monday afternoon. It was the same day Russ had died. Barbara's father, James Terry, showed Buchanan the bloody sheets and the pillowcases from Barbara's bed. He had taken them to his house to be washed. He asked if the sheriff needed them, and Buchanan just replied no, he didn't. To Buchanan's surprise, Barbara didn't seem too upset, even though her husband had died only hours earlier. He was also surprised when Barbara agreed to return to her house to show him the room in which Russ had been shot. She rode with him in his car, and when they arrived at the house, she showed no distress as she described what had occurred. In the bedroom, the bed had already been made. It was as if nothing had happened at all. And afterward, Buchanan drove Barbara back to her parents' house. After considering all he had seen, Buchanan decided that no autopsy was necessary and Russ Stager's body could be released to the funeral home. He wrote in his report that the death was being declared as accidental. He also noted that the gun had not been examined for fingerprints. On Monday night, Jolynn heard about Russ's death. She learned that he had been shot by Barbara and that she had claimed that it was an accident. Immediately, Jolynn began dialing the sheriff department, eventually reaching Rick Buchanan on Tuesday morning. She asked if she could come in to talk to him right away. When they met, Jolynn brought a letter introducing herself and telling all that she had been told by Russ himself. She told Buchanan that Russ had confided to her that he had been afraid for his own safety from Barbara, and that Barbara had also lied about many things, being offered a book contract, having a job, money issues, and having affairs as well. Buchanan seemed less than impressed with this news until Jolynn added something else, something that he definitely had not been aware of. Barbara's first husband had also been killed in an accidental shooting with a gun in the home 10 years earlier. After reporting what she knew to the police, Jolynn visited the home of Al and Doris Stager. She hadn't seen Al and Doris for 10 years, but they welcomed her with open arms. And once they were all together they started talking about their mutual suspicion of Barbara. Meanwhile, the parents of Larry, Henry and Doris Ford, learned about the death of Russ Stager while watching their local news on TV. The news had reported the death of the popular high school coach, who had been accidentally shot by his wife. Shocked and saddened, but realizing that this may be the opportunity to voice their old suspicions of Barbara to law enforcement, they immediately got in contact with the Durham County Sheriff Department. Sergeant Rick Buchanan listened to what they had to say, and he realized that now he had a huge case on his hands. When Buchanan researched the death of Larry Ford and found that his death had indeed been classified as a homicide for several months, he also learned that, like Russ, Larry had been shot with a .25 caliber bullet. Right away, Buchanan ordered that Russ's body be returned from the funeral home and brought to the hospital for a proper autopsy. By this time, the Stagers had also come in to talk to the police as well, and to tell them the whole story of the financial problems that Russ and Barbara had always found themselves in. Al and Doris also reported that they had not heard Russ speaking of being worried about prowlers around his house, like Barbara had stated that he had been. The investigation into the death of Russ Stager was now in full force. However, Buchanan didn't want to alert Barbara to the fact that she was under suspicion. He needed her to keep talking, to keep giving the police details, in the hopes that she would make a mistake in what she said. He wanted her to remain under the impression that the police were still considering Russ's death as purely accidental. Meanwhile, the autopsy had revealed that the direction of the bullet that had lodged in Russ's head had traveled downward, which meant that Barbara's story about the gun going off accidentally as she pulled it out from under Russ's pillow simply could not have happened. Buchanan also learned about Barbara's embezzlement at her former bank teller job 10 years ago, a crime for which she had never been charged. Further investigation into Barbara Stager brought to light her multiple affairs, including a rumored current and ongoing affair happening with a doctor at Duke Medical Center. And once investigators really looked into it, the scene of Russ's death started to look fishy. The empty shell casing lying so close to the weapon just did not make sense. And testing on the gun itself proved it was almost impossible to make it go off accidentally. It wasn't a sensitive gun, and it needed a lot of shaking and jostling to make it fire. It did not have a light trigger as Barbara had stated, and it certainly needed a finger inside the finger guard to pull the trigger. Buchanan needed a definitive statement from Barbara and needed to get her version of the events on record. He and his team arrived at Barbara's house unannounced, not wanting Barbara to have time to think about what she would say and to practice what she would show them. Still assuring Barbara that Russ's death was being considered as accidental, Buchanan asked her to go over the events of the night again. He decided to push the envelope a bit, and he asked Barbara to reenact what had happened. He was shocked when Barbara agreed, and he was shocked even more when she agreed to get in the same bed in which Russ had died to reenact the shooting with another officer playing the part of a sleeping Russ. It was only 4 days after the shooting had occurred. The officers would later comment to each other that it seemed like a very cold thing to do. Buchanan was shocked even further that Barbara allowed the reenactment to be videotaped. The tape would later be very damning in court, and he could only conclude that Barbara was just eager for the investigation to end so that she could collect her insurance money. She had jumped at the chance for the investigation to be moved along to a conclusion. However, the conclusion of Buchanan's investigation was leading into a whole different direction than Barbara had thought. Later, it was discovered that on the same day, only an hour after the reenactment, Barbara was at the courthouse filing for probate on Russ's estate and naming herself executive after submitting Russ's will. She listed $98,000 in life insurance benefits, even though in actuality, she would be due more than that. From Barbara's reenactment of the shooting and comparing it to the autopsy results, plus the evidence collected from the scene documented by police, Barbara's story just could not be the truth. Barbara Stager had become the prime suspect in the murder of her husband, Russ Stager. Looking into the case further, Buchanan met with officials who had investigated, or rather did not investigate, the death of Larry Ford 10 years earlier. He also met with Larry's parents, who had been just waiting for justice for their son for 10 long years. The other set of grieving parents, Al and Doris Stager, were asked to keep the lines of communication open with Barbara so that the police would have inside information on what she was doing. They agreed, although it was very difficult for them to remain in contact with Barbara. On April 18, 1988, less than 3 months after the death of Russ, police searched Barbara's home on Fox Drive. Barbara's brother Steve was there at the time, watching as the police took financial papers, letters from the Fords to Barbara and her sons, the incomplete book manuscript, and the fake Doubleday publisher letterhead. The police also interviewed Barbara's 2 sons separately, finally bringing all their evidence to the grand jury. An indictment was granted, and the officers returned to the house on Fox Drive and arrested Barbara Stager in the first-degree murder of her husband, Russ Stager. Media outlets latched onto the case, dredging up the mysterious death of Barbara's first husband, Larry Ford, which echoed the death of her second husband, Russ Stager. The rumors of Barbara's affairs hit the press as well and made for a very scandalous story. Barbara and her family would complain that she was being convicted in the press. Because Barbara's financial situation was so dire, and because James and Marva Terry just simply could not afford to help her, Barbara asked to be declared indigent so that she could have a court-appointed attorney. Her attorney argued on behalf of Barbara successfully, and after 2 weeks of waiting in jail for her bond to be raised, Barbara was released. While she waited for the trial to begin, she moved in with her parents, and the house on Fox Drive was rented out in order to help raise additional money. The trial of Barbara Stager was moved from Durham County to the city of Sanford in Lee County, 45 miles away, in hopes that jurors who had not heard of Barbara Stager could be found. In the meantime, state prosecutors were hard at work to build their case against Barbara. Joe Lynn and Doris Stager had volunteered to go through Russ's personal and financial documents to find anything out of the ordinary. It was discovered that Russ's signature had been forged on several important documents. But the biggest evidence bombshell came out of nowhere, and it was something that no one could have ever expected. It was a tape recording. An audio cassette had been found by a student at the high school where Russ worked and coached, and after listening to the contents of the tape, The student's parents had brought it straight to the police. It was a recording that Russ had made himself. He had recorded himself talking about his suspicions that his wife may have been planning something disastrous. Doris and Al Stager both identified the voice as being the voice of their son. They were sure it was him. The trial of Barbara Stager was held in the Lee County Courthouse in North Carolina. Early on in the proceedings, the videotaped reenactment of Russ's shooting, starring Miss Barbara herself, was played for the jury. Barbara's defense knew it was a damning piece of evidence. Even more damning was the fact that in the video, Barbara had mentioned to the investigators, in a very offhand way, that her first husband had also died in an accidental gun death in the home. Because of Barbara's own admission on the tape, the prosecutor was allowed to present evidence to the jury regarding the death of Larry Ford and of the suspicious circumstances surrounding it. One major sticking point in Barbara's story about her first husband's death was that she had later come to explain Larry's death to friends and acquaintances that he had died by accidentally shooting himself while cleaning his gun. Evidence from the scene clearly disputed that. And of course, Larry Ford's body was found in bed with the covers pulled up. It was doubtful that it was a position in which someone would be in while cleaning a gun, especially a person who had been trained to use guns safely in the Marine Reserves. In the intervening 10 years, Barbara had also made changes in her story of Larry's death, telling different things to family and friends. For instance, Barbara had said varying things about what she had heard that night while sleeping on the couch downstairs. To some, she had said that she had heard a gunshot upstairs, but to other people she had said that she had thought she had heard a picture frame falling on the floor. One piece of hard evidence was that the gun clip had been found under the covers with the body of Larry Ford. The gun itself had been found on the floor beside the bed. Gun experts pointed out that it shouldn't have fired at all with the clip out, and since the clip was found under the blanket, it was very suspicious. Another damning piece of evidence which police officers remembered from the scene was that an empty shell casing was found in an odd place. It was found on the floor hidden between some tennis shoes. The officers knew that if Larry had fired the shot that had killed him, it would be impossible for the shell to have landed there. Of course, a huge piece of evidence, which had shockingly not led to prosecution 10 years earlier, was that Larry Ford's hands had been bagged at the scene and later tested to have no gunshot residue. Of course, Barbara's hands had never been tested. This time around, the prosecution performed tests to see if the type of gun used in Larry's death may have accidentally fired when dropped onto the carpeted floor. But in none of those tests did that occur. Turning back to the death of Russ Stager, the prosecution pointed out the evidence of his autopsy, pointing out how the bullet had entered the back of Russ's head and from what angle it had traveled. It had been shot downward. By that time, the jury had already seen the videotaped interview of Barbara in which she reenacted the shooting, during which she never showed herself in a position in which the gun could have been shot at a downward angle into Russ. Jurors also heard the evidence that it would not make sense for a spent shell casing to be found only inches from the discarded pistol. Additionally, the prosecutor had presented the evidence that the particular pistol used in the shooting had a safety feature, which was very difficult to turn off. The defense responded by saying that Russ had slept with the gun under his pillow with the safety already turned off. The prosecution countered that someone trained in gun safety like Russ was would never do anything that dangerous. A large part of the trial was taken up to explain all of the financial shenanigans that Barbara went through in order to keep her severe debt secret away from Russ. One key witness stated that Barbara had come alone to the bank in January of 1987 to apply for a 90-day loan to pay off credit card debts. She requested that the notices about the loan be sent to a different address than her home address because she did not want someone at home to find out about the loan, the witness said. Barbara had gone to other banks to do the same exact thing. In one instance, telling the loan officer that she would bring in a signed form from Russ, even though legally the bank officer should have witnessed his signature. Later in the trial, it would be proven to be a forged signature as well. By the end of January 1988, 1 year later, Barbara's constant dance of spending too much money and shuffling of the debt to different accounts and loans was catching up to her. It was the end of the month, and the banks would no longer just take Barbara's word that they would be paid back. They wanted to talk to Russ. On February 1st, 1988, Russ Stager was killed. The tape recording that had been found on a cassette found by a student at Russ's high school was played for the court. It was an eerie thing hearing the victim's voice played out in court, especially since the content of the recording was all about Russ's suspicions of his wife, Barbara. The prosecution brought to the stand family and friends of Russ Stager who identified the voice as his. On the other side, the defense denied that the voice on the tape belonged to Russ, bringing witnesses to the stand that stated in their opinion that it wasn't Russ at all. They argued that someone had impersonated Russ's voice and read from a script, a possible plot by the police or the prosecutors or even Russ's family. Among the witnesses who testified that they didn't think it was Russ's voice at all was Russ's own son, Brian Stager. Before the tape was allowed to be played in front of the jury, however, the judge was asked to make a decision as to its authenticity. The judge ruled that he found that the voice on the tape was indeed the voice of Russ Stager, allowing the tape to be played in open court. This is what was played in the courtroom. These are the words of Russ Stager from the recording. The last few nights, during sleep, Barbara had woke me up to give me some kind of medication. I have not taken it. Last night she woke me up and gave me what she said was 2 aspirin, but this was like 4:30 in the morning. She stood there to see if I took it. I placed it under the bed. She came to check to make sure I had taken it, saying she wanted something to drink from what I was drinking. This morning, she normally is up and gone by 7. Today at 7, she was still in bed. She said that she was going to go to work at 8. Before I got up, she was over there around on my side, acting like she was looking for something what I supposedly took that last night. Now, this was on the night of January the 28th, a Thursday night. So she stayed there looking to see if I had taken the stuff this morning. I got it out of there, although she was looking very close to see if I was trying to retrieve it. She made the comment that, "You didn't take those aspirins that I gave you." I said, "Yeah, I did." "Well, I took the 2 capsules to Eckerd's Pharmacy at Forest Hills, and they said that it was sleeping pills. Now, if I was already asleep at 4:30 in the morning, why would somebody wake me up to give me 2 sleeping pills? Also, at one time a few years ago, I had to get a post office box because a lot of the mail coming to the house, the bills and stuff, they seemed to be disappearing from when she got home first. Now, I've only got 1 key to this post office box. For the last couple weeks, every time I turned around, she'd take the key off the key ring and supposedly she'd gone to check the mail herself. Now, a couple months, December and January, I haven't even gotten the bill from Visa, which she says she's called them and they said that there's been a misunderstanding. I don't understand. I don't understand myself why a person wouldn't send the bill if they had been sending it for a year every month and not missing. Why all of a sudden that they would miss? Here, my question is, every time I turn around, why is she taking that key and running over there to check the post office box? Unless there's something in there she's trying to hide. 'Cause that's the reason I got the post office box to start off with, so I would make sure I got all the mail and nothing got misplaced or destroyed. Years ago, her grandmother died. On the day of the funeral, she supposedly had to go somewhere to do something. I took one of the cars to wash it. When I was coming back, though, after washing the car and getting it filled up, I saw her other car sitting at the county stadium out there in the parking lot all by itself. nobody around. So I went across to the armory and sat in that parking lot waiting to see who came up. She came up with some guy. I couldn't see great, but I did see that they were in the car making out and stuff like this. When I went over there in my car, he took off, and then she tried to put it off on me that I wasn't giving her affection and all this kind of stuff. Now that's pretty strange to be doing this on the day that you're going to put your grandmother in the ground, in my opinion. Barbara's husband, the first one, I don't know what happened, but according to his parents, there was some kind of foul play going on. He supposedly accidentally shot himself in their bedroom with a pistol. Now, I have no idea what really went on, what really happened. She was there when it happened, and so were the boys. My question is, did her husband, Larry Ford, accidentally shoot himself? I'm just being paranoid about all this stuff, I know. Sometimes I just wonder. When we lived on Falkirk Drive, numerous times policemen were coming over there supposedly to serve some kind of warrant on her for some bill she didn't pay. Now that's pretty tough considering that you're hiding that from your husband and everything, which it would be hard to hide from the law. She also took money from WTIK when she worked there and didn't do with it what she was supposed to do with it. It was like a payment, but she never did the work, which I had to turn around and try and reimburse them for some of that. Also, I think one of the banks here in town that we tried to get a loan from knew her, and because of that, they wouldn't even give us the loan. Wouldn't give me the reason why, but just would not give us the loan. The bank was NCNB over there on Duke Street. I still to this day don't know the reason, what she had done when she supposedly had worked there for a short time. But her parents were sitting right there with me and they wouldn't give us any answer why. Also at CCB and First Union at one time, she had flip-flopped some money that she supposedly had covered in the bank, but what she was doing was writing a check from one bank, taking the money out of the other bank to cover that and vice versa, which obviously didn't work. Jiggling this money back and forth was done for our car payments, which never really were being made, and I had to come up with that money to pay off the car because the bank was ready to raise all kinds of cane. She supposedly signed my name on one of the bank cards, but really was not my name. Back to Wednesday night, January the 27th. Barbara had given me something that was supposedly for sinuses and some aspirin that supposedly was Nuprin, and about 5 that morning I woke up and I was feeling terrible. I was hurting real bad around my eyes, under my eyes, my temple, and I really wonder if what she gave me was sinus medicine and Nuprin. I also had a real bad case of the cotton mouth. Even after all this, when she woke up and saw I was in pain, she actually tried to give me more stuff, which I wouldn't take. Well, I really hope that I'm being paranoid about all this stuff that's going on, but I really wonder. This is Russ Stager, and this is January 29th, 1988, 10 minutes to 2. And that was the end of the recording. The defense would not bring Barbara Stager to the stand in her trial. She never spoke in her own defense. If she had, it would have opened the door to the prosecution being able to question her directly about her financial problems, the affairs, and everything else. From there, they would have also been able to bring in rebuttal witnesses. And that would have been devastating for Barbara's case. After closing arguments from both the defense and the prosecution, both sides rested. The next morning, back in court on Wednesday, May 17, 1989, the judge instructed the jurors to move to the jury room to begin their deliberations. It was at 9:55 a.m. when they were dismissed. At 10:39 a.m., only 44 minutes later, the jurors returned to the courtroom. They had reached a verdict already, surprising everyone in court. The jury had found Barbara Stager guilty of the first-degree murder of Russ Stager. One by one, each juror stood, affirming that yes, that indeed was their verdict.